Hello and welcome to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to be showing you how to build a PC in the Cooler Master Masterbox 520. I'm also going to be using their brand new I/O. It's the MasterLiquid 360L Core ARGB. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using ASRock Z790 Phantom Gaming Riptide. For the CPU, I'm going to be using Intel's 13th Gen i7, the 13700K. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Beast RGB DDR5 at 5600 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from Team Group and it's their T-Force Cardia A440 Pro. Powering the whole build, I've got an 850 watt fully modular gold power supply from Cooler Master. It's the V850 iGold Multi. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using the Aorus Master RTX 4070. And because our rear case fan doesn't have any ARGB on it, I'm going to be replacing it with a Cooler Master SickleFlow 120 ARGB fan in black. Okay, that's all the parts, let's get building. To remove our case's tempered glass side panel, we've got a non-captive thumb screw at the back we need to remove. And once it's been removed, we can simply tilt the side panel out and lift it up and away. To remove our other side panel, we've got two captive thumb screws at the back which we need to loosen, and then we can pull the panel backwards, tilt out and lift away. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power button, we've got a single USB Type A port and a single USB Type C port. We've got a combined headphone and microphone jack, and we've also got a button to control the case's built-in ARGB controller. Taking a look at our case's front panel, we've got a tempered glass panel and then vented panels for airflow either side of the tempered glass. We don't need to remove the tempered glass panel for this particular build, but I'll show you how to do it in case you do want to replace out the front fans. It's just a simple matter of putting the panel off from the bottom. So you can see at the front of the case we've got three 120mm ARGB fans pre-installed at the front. If you prefer, you can mount up to two 140mm fans or up to 360 or 280mm radiator. And it's exactly the same at the top of the case, up to three 120 or 240mm fans or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. While at the rear of the case it's up to a 120mm fan, and Cooler Master have installed this non-ARGB fan at the back of the case. I'm planning on replacing this with a fan that has ARGB, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the fan. Just before I remove our rear case fan, I want to point out two things. The first is all our four included case fans have 3-pin fan connectors, so you are going to have to run them in DC mode rather than PWM mode. And the other thing to mention is our case has a built-in fan and ARGB hub, and our three front fans are already connected up to the hub. The rear fan isn't, and the reason for that is that the cable is actually too short to reach the hub. So what you're going to have to do with this rear fan is either plug it into a header directly on the motherboard or use a cable extension to get it to reach the hub. So our rear fan is held on with 4 screws we need to remove. So I'm just going to replace that with a Cooler Master fan that has some ARGB on it. So the first thing I'm going to do is set the fan into the case and pass the cables through to the back. And then we'll secure the fan into place with the same 4 screws we've just removed. So coming from our fan, we've got a PWM cable and also an ARGB cable, but unfortunately the cables coming from this fan are also too short to reach our fan hub. So what I'm going to do is I do have this cable extension for a fan, so we can go ahead and plug the fan into the cable extension. And although this fan has a 4-pin PWM connector on it, we're still going to be able to plug it into the 3-pin header on our fan hub. There's little notch here, and there's little notches on the cable as well, so it's only going to go into the right 3 pins. So it's just a matter of lining it up and pushing into place. The ARGB cable I'm going to connect to a splitter cable that comes from our I/O later on. On the top of the case we've got a magnetically attached dust filter which can simply be pulled away. Our case's top panel is removable. There's 2 screws we need to remove. And with the 2 screws removed, all we need to do is tilt the top panel upwards and then we can lift it away. So you can see with our top panel removed, we're going to have improved access to the case for the build, as well installing our I/O at the top is going to be much easier on the removable bracket. In terms of motherboard support, the case supports motherboards up to E80X in size, and if you want to go with a CPU or cooler, the maximum height supported is 165mm. So you can see at the rear of the case we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slot brackets, and in terms of GPU support it's up to a maximum length of 410mm. Moving into our rear compartment, and it's good to see we've got lots of cutouts in all the right places, and the 3 cutouts to the right hand side of the motherboard have rubber grommets on them. We've also got plenty of cable tie down points, and cable routing space at the back looks to be reasonable. So taking a look at the rear of the case, you can see our case has a built-in fan and ARGB controller, and our 3 front fans are already pre-installed. I've also plugged in our rear fan into this fan header here. Now importantly, the fan headers have 3-pin connectors on them, and with that plugged in, we've got 2 spare ARGB ports, one for our rear fan and then 1 spare one as well. We've also got the controller button plugged in here that's going to allow the button on the front of the case to cycle through the controller's built-in ARGB effects. Behind our motherboard, we've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounting locations. And then if we take a look down at the bottom of the case, our case accessory bag is just here with our case cables. So down at the bottom of the case, we've got a hard drive cage, which is movable and removable. There's a thumb screw here, so we can go ahead and loosen it. And then with it loosened, we can simply pull the hard drive cage towards us to remove it from the case. So we take a look down at the bottom, you'll notice there is 2 mounting locations on either side for the hard drive cage. So it was installed in the front location, but there's also the option to move it further back if we prefer. And we've got an extra hole here for securing the thumb screw. So on the top of our hard drive cage, we're going to be able to mount a 2.5-inch drive. You get these little rubber grommets in the case accessory box that we can simply push into the top of the hard drive cage. And then in the top of our 2.5-inch drive, we screw in these little pegs. And then it's just a simple matter of lining the pegs up with the rubber grommets and pushing into place to secure our drive in place. And this is exactly the same mechanism that you're going to use for mounting 2 2.5-inch drives on the back of the case. So in the drive cage itself, you're going to be able to mount 2 3.5-inch drives. In the case accessory box, you get these. One of these is going to go on either side of the hard drive cage. You've got these little pins which go into the holes on the drive, and then it's just going to be a simple matter of lining this up and sliding the drive into place. So our power supply is going to go down at the bottom, and the case is compatible with full-sized ATX power supplies up to a maximum length of 200mm, although Cooler Master do recommend trying to keep it below 170mm. Although if you go ahead and remove the hard drive cage like I've done, you've got absolutely loads of room for your power supply. We don't have any removable brackets for our power supply at the back, so we are going to have to set our power supply in from the side before screwing it in from the back. And on the bottom of the case, we've got a tray-style dust filter over our power supply's intake, and it can simply be pulled out from the back for cleaning. We're now ready to start working our motherboard, and we're going to be installing our CPU, the bracket for our CPU cooler, our M.2 SSD, and our RAM before we put the motherboard into the case. To open our socket cover, we need to push this lever down and out and bring it all the way to the top of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to lift the cover up. We can then take our CPU, holding it by the edges, and drop it into the socket, making sure the text is the correct way up. And you'll notice there's little notches in the socket that are going to line up with the CPU. Once we've got it lined up, it's just a little wiggle from side to side to check it's properly seated in the socket. And once we're happy it is, we can go ahead and close the lever down again. And I like to provide a little bit of pressure here at this stage to get the black bit of plastic to pop off. And then we'll take this and put it into our motherboard box for safekeeping. We can then go ahead and close the lever down to secure our CPU in the socket. In terms of installing our M.2 SSD, this motherboard actually has 5 M.2 SSD sockets for drives. There's also one for a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card as well. 2 of them are behind this top socket. There's a Gen 5 and a Gen 4 socket, although you can only use one of them at once. And then we've got a further 3 Gen 4 sockets. There's 1 here and 2 behind this bottom heatsink. Now the 2 behind the top heatsink go directly to the CPU, while the bottom 3 ones for drives actually go via the chipset. So for us, with our one drive, we're best installing it behind the top heatsink. So this is our Gen 5 socket and this is our Gen 4 socket, and although our drive is a Gen 4 drive, we can put it in either of these sockets. The only issue with putting it in the Gen 5 socket is it shares PCIe lanes with our graphics card. So installing the drive here means the PCIe lanes for our graphics card will be reduced from 16 to 8, whereas if we install it in the Gen 4 socket, we're not going to have any sacrifices. That makes sense to install it here. You can see our standoff here is in the right location for a Gen 4 drive. If we want to install it in the Gen 5 socket, we would just need to move this standoff over to here. So we can go ahead and set our drive into the socket, just wiggling it from side to side into place. We can then flatten our drive down and use a screw from the case accessory box to secure the drive to the standoff. If you're using the motherboard from new, there'll be some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink you're going to need to remove. And then we can replace our heatsink. Because we've only got 2 sticks of RAM, we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU, so I'm going to open the clips on either side of these slots. Then it's just a matter of lining the RAM up with the slot, and once we're happy it's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. Same thing with our second stick, line it up with the socket, and once we're happy it's lined up, some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. We're now ready to install the bracket for our CPU cooler. We've got an LGI 1700 socket, so we're going to want to use the Intel bracket labelled Cooler Master 1700, and it's just a simple matter of lining it up with the holes in the back of the motherboard. Then we just need to screw one of these standoffs onto each corner. Next we can set the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back. Then we can secure the motherboard to the case using the screws from the case accessory box. So you'll notice I haven't put screws into these two holes, and that's because our GPU comes with the GPU support bracket, which I'm going to install here. If you're using a different GPU, just put the standard screws into these two holes as well. So for installing our GPU support bracket, the first thing we need to do is put these long standoffs into place. And there's two different types that come with the GPU support bracket, depending on the thread that your case uses. For our case, we're going to want to use the larger threads. So all we need to do is set the standoff into place and screw it in. Then we can line our GPU support bracket up with the standoffs, and then we'll secure it into place with a screw and a washer that came with the GPU. The other part of our GPU support bracket we can clip onto the right hand side of the graphics card. We'll slide it all the way to the top at the front, and then the end screw hole, we're going to put another screw with a washer on it into place. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in. Our HD audio cable is going to go into this header down the bottom left of the motherboard. So we'll bring it through the cutout and we'll plug it in with the HD audio text facing up the way, and then pull the access cable through to the back. Two headers along, we've got a system fan header, so we'll bring the 3-pin cable coming from our fan hub through, line it up with the header, and push into place, and again pull the access cable through to the back. We've got an ARGB header down at the bottom of the motherboard, so we'll bring the ARGB cable coming from our controller through, line it up with the header, and push into place, and again pull the access cable through to the back. Our front panel connectors are going to go to this header down the bottom right of the motherboard. So we'll bring our cables through the cutout, and then we're going to have to pay real close attention to the diagram and the motherboard manual to make sure we're plugging the cables into the right pins on the header. So starting off with the bottom row, working from left to right, pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side are for hard drive LED positive and hard drive LED negative, so we'll plug it in with the text facing down the way. Moving up to the top row, pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side are for power LED positive and power LED negative. And then next to that we've got our power switch. It doesn't matter which way it goes in, I'm going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. And then we can go ahead and pull all the excess cable through to the back. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. Our front panel Type-C cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll go ahead and bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, and push into place. And then again, we'll bring all the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply. It is fully modular, so it comes without any of these cables plugged in. I've gone ahead and plugged in the ones that we're going to need. So plugged in a 24-pin cable, two 8-pin EPS cables to provide additional power to our CPU, and a 12-volt high power cable to power our graphics card. I've also plugged in a SATA power cable because our case's ARGB controller is going to need SATA power. And I plugged in a USB cable because this is a smart power supply and it can connect up to our motherboard. Another important thing to point out, this is our power supply's intake fan, so we're going to want to install it facing down the way where it can get cool air from underneath the case. So it's just a matter of setting the power supply into place from the side and sliding it all the way to the back. And then we can secure our power supply into place with the same screws we used to secure the motherboard to the case. Next we can get our power supply cables plugged in, and our EPS cables are going to go into these two headers at the top left of the motherboard. So we can bring our cables through the cutout, line them up with the headers and push into place. And then again we'll just pull all the excess cable through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got two USB 2.0 headers down the bottom of the motherboard, so we can bring the USB cable coming from our power supply through and plug it in with the USB text facing up the way. And then we'll just pull the excess cable through to the back. At the back of the case, we can then plug the SATA cable coming from our case's ARGB controller into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. So because we're going to be installing this with an Intel motherboard, we can go ahead and set our Intel brackets on top of the pump. And then if we turn things over, we can then set a screw into place. We can set our other bracket into place at the bottom. And again, we'll pop our screws into place. Next, we can set our fans onto the radiator, and we're going to want the cables coming out towards the back of the case. So I've already lined this up in the case, and this is going to be the front, this is going to be the back. So I've got the cables coming out this way. Then we've got these long thumb screws to secure the fans to the radiator. And then I'm just going to give each of the thumb screws a little tighten with a screwdriver. So coming from each of our fans, we've got two cables. We've got this 4-pin PWM cable, which is going to power our fan, allowing it to spin, and also allow us to adjust the speed that it spins at. The other is a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable, and this is going to power the lighting on the fans and also allow us to control the ARGB effects. Now with the IO, we get this triple PWM splitter cable. So what I'm going to do is plug the PWM cable coming from each fan into the splitter cable. There we go, so we've now just got one PWM connector to plug into the CPU fan header on our motherboard. So moving on to your ARGB cables, in the box we get this 5:1 ARGB splitter cable. So all we need to do is pull the ends off the cable. We've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB header here, and all we need to do is line each of the cables coming from the fans up with it. Now, if this was in at the back of the case when we were doing cable management, there is a chance that if I pull this, it could come disconnected. So Cooler Master have thought about this, and in the box you get this little clip that you simply push over the top, and that prevents the cables coming disconnected. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect up the other two fans. So there we go, all we're going to need to do is plug this ARGB cable into an ARGB header on our motherboard, or actually our case is an ARGB controller, so we can plug it into here as well. And this is going to allow us to control all the lighting on all three of the fans. Now coming from this cable, I said it was a 5:1 cable, we've got two additional headers, which means we're going to be able to plug two further devices into it. And this is useful if we take a look at our pump. So coming from our pump, we've got two cables. Again, we've got a 3-pin 5V ARGB cable to control the lighting effects on the pump. So as I mentioned, we've got two spare connectors on that 5:1 ARGB cable, so we're just going to need to plug it into here. I'm going to wait until it's installed in the case to plug it in. And the other is a 3-pin fan connector, which we're going to plug into the pump header on our motherboard, and that's going to power the pump and allow us to adjust its speed. So we can go ahead and set our case's top panel into place, and then we can secure the IO to the case using these short radiator screws. And then we can return the dust filter at the top. We can then return the top panel to the case. And secure the top panel into place with the two screws we removed earlier on. I'm then going to pass all the fan cables through to the back of the case. Next we can add some thermal paste to the centre of the CPU. It is included with the cooler. Before we install our pump, we need to remove the plastic protection. And then we can go ahead and line the pump up with the bracket we installed on the motherboard. We're then going to want to get a thumb screw onto each corner. And then we can tighten each corner up with a screwdriver. So you'll notice I've installed the pump with the tubes over to the right hand side. The reason for this is we've got the MasterLiquid text on the pump itself, and it isn't rotatable. So had you actually installed it in any other orientation, this wouldn't be the correct way up. We've then got the two cables coming from our pump, and I'm just going to route them up under this bracket here because it's just going to help keep the cables slightly better organized. So you can see just wrapping the cables around there is going to help organise them on the way up towards the top of the motherboard. It wasn't the easiest to get them to fit through, so what I would actually recommend doing is wrapping the cables under this bracket before you install it. I'm then going to pass the ARGB cable through to the back of the case. And then we've got two fan headers. The bottom one is our CPU fan header where we're going to plug the fans on the radiator into. The top one is our pump header. So I'm going to take the cable coming from our pump and plug it into here. I'm going to bring the triple splitter cable coming from the fans and the radiator and plug it into our CPU fan header. And then we'll just route all the cables through to the back. So at the back of the case we can plug our 5:1 ARGB splitter cable into our ARGB hub. We can then take another spare port on this cable and plug in the ARGB cable coming from our pump into it. And then we'll put the little connector over the top to secure the two cables together. Our ARGB cable has one spare port on it, which is great because our rear case fan is then going to be able to plug into here. And then again, we'll put the little cover on to keep the cables together. We're now ready to install our graphics card, so we're going to need to remove the second and third expansion slot cover from the top. And we can open the clip in the top PCIe slot on the motherboard. Next we can set our graphics card into place. The first thing is we're going to put our GPU support bracket under the other bit of the bracket, and then once we're happy the graphics card is lined up, it's just some firm pressure and it's going to clip into place. We can then secure the graphics card into place with the two screws we removed earlier on. Then if we take a look over our GPU support bracket, you can see the hole on the bracket from the graphics card, and all we're going to need to do is put another screw and washer through it and tighten it up. So you can see the GPU support bracket is doing a great job of supporting our really heavy 4070. Next we can bring our 12 volt high power cable through the bottom cutout to the right of the motherboard. We're then going to line it up with our graphics card. And once we're happy everything's lined up, just some firm pressure to push it into place and we've got a nice satisfying click. And then we can just pull the excess cable through to the back. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management so we can get the side panel back on again. So that's our build complete and looking great. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, set up the RGB software and adjust all the BIOS settings, I'll put a link to another video in the description which talks you through all of that. So following this video up to that point and then moving over to that video, you'll be able to get the PC fully set up. Now I have already done a full case review for the version of this case which has the mesh front panel, so I'm not going to be repeating that today, but what I have done is I've done a little bit of thermal testing. So our CPU idled at 35 degrees and reached a maximum of 106 degrees during a 10-minute IDA64 stability test, with all components in the system being stressed. Our GPU idled at 27 degrees and reached a maximum of 52 degrees during the IDA64 stability test. In terms of noise levels, we had an average noise of 40 decibels at idle and 52 decibels under load. So the IDA64 stability test is a really extreme test, and in general when you're gaming on the PC the temperatures won't be hitting anywhere near these levels. But the biggest question I had about this particular case with the tempered glass panel at the front and only really the vented air take coming in at the side of the tempered glass panel was, is this front panel restrictive and what were the temperatures going to be like? So the best way to test this was to actually remove the tempered glass panel and then repeat the thermal testing. So removing the tempered glass front panel, our CPU idled 1 degree cooler and it was 7 degrees cooler during the stability test. Our GPU idled 1 degree cooler and was 2 degrees cooler during the stability test. So based on my previous testing, what I can tell you, a case with a really good unrestricted front panel, removing that front panel, I would expect the temperatures to come down between 0 and 1 degrees. A case that has a really restricted front panel, removing it, I would expect the temperature to come down by maybe 7-8 degrees. So our 7 degree reduction in the CPU temperatures to me means that the front panel in this case is really restrictive. So I can't recommend building a high-end system with a really hard to cool CPU in this particular version of the case. What I could recommend, if you're going for easier to cool components, the front panel being restrictive shouldn't really make that much of a difference. And our GPU is a perfect example of that. There was very little difference in our GPU temperatures with the front panel on and the front panel off. And the reason for this is a really easy GPU to cool. It's got a massive beefy cooler and it runs incredibly cool. CPU is the opposite. It's a really difficult CPU to cool, and getting temperatures as in the 90s isn't unusual in different cases. So again, what I would say in this particular version of the case, if you're happy to build an easy to cool components, I can definitely recommend it. If you want to go with more of a high-end system with difficult to cool components, there is a version of this case which has a mesh panel on it, and you're going to be absolutely fine in that case. Following the build guide is going to be exactly the same, because really the only difference between the two cases is the front panel is made of mesh, whereas this one is made of tempered glass. I've also done a full step-by-step build guide and a full case review in the mesh version of this case, so I'll put links to all those videos in the description. So hopefully you have enjoyed this full step-by-step build guide. If you have, please remember to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not currently subscribed to the channel, please hit the subscribe button as well. Thanks for watching.